Citizen complaints to police concerning homelessness, public perceptions of homelessness, dispatch responses reflected with incoming calls to Santa Fe Regional Emergency Communications Center, SF RECC. This includes 911 emergency calls and non-emergency calls. The calls came in between February 2024 and February 2026. I'm the author, Miss Wakeland. We're dealing with calls that came in to Santa Fe RECC at Santa Fe, New Mexico, a city of a population of 90,553, within Santa Fe County with a total population of 156,000. What are my methods? Well, this is all public information. I put in a request under the New Mexico Inspection of Public Records Act, and I requested that they screen the calls for unhoused, homeless, and vagrant string of characters. And so I received the calls, and this is the database that we're looking at. From all the data that I received, I scrubbed it. I eliminated duplicates, requests for information only, fire department calls and dispatches, calls that were canceled by the caller, records lacking incomplete data, they were all excluded. So we're left with a total of 5,202 for the first year and 5,313 for the second year. Incoming call codes given by the dispatcher were consolidated into umbrella groups for those dispatch codes that had multiple separate codes for basically one type of offense. For example, assault and battery, property destruction, or violent crimes. For the violent crimes category, I consolidated such offenses such as homicide, rape, arson, also weapons charges, and as well I put in here warrants. The officers are dispatched to serve a warrant. And these warrant dispatches, they're the one dispatch is based on empiricism. All the other calls basically are people's opinions. Although the dispatchers ask some questions to get some information, basically the calls that are coming in are opinion. They're not any kind of proof that a crime has actually been committed, except for the warrants. The warrants are established probable cause that someone has committed a crime, and the officers are dispatched in order to serve the warrant and take the person into custody. Other law enforcement databases here concerning incoming calls are available on the web. They're also public information. They're the city hot sheets and the county hot sheets. Now, for our literature review, we have a lot of relevant literature review here for this topic. So all these topics here, all this literature here, it was actually dealing with the general public incoming calls to this to some kind of a public dispatch. It could be emergency or it could be non-emergency. Now we see these various types. They're all relevant, and basically what we're dealing with is the earliest that we have was 1981, and that shows that at least as early as then, in USA, we had studies going on that this particular phenomenon of call-ins to public telephone numbers regarding different social problems, a request for dispatch, requests for assistance. It could be homeless people could be calling in themselves asking for assistance. And that's the end to this report. In this report, they tracked types of service according to social welfare. And they tried to analyze the effect of the incoming calls on the dispatch operators' decisions. Then, in the Koenigsmark study in 2026, the researchers coded incoming calls regarding homeless people by request type and correlated them with neighborhood economic indicators, such as unemployment and eviction. These data were also available from public records, and they were anonymous. Based on the quantity of nonviolent reports, the authors suggested that cities can analyze whether resources other than police responses would be more beneficial. Secondarily, such calls indicate how the community perceives its needs. In other words, in this report, the authors concluded that even though they were based on opinions and even though they didn't really prove a crime had been committed, that these incoming calls had certain value, if only because they're telling us the needs of the community. In regards to homeless call-ins, Heron in 2019 identified a crisis of complaints. This was based on a 72 increase in the number of incoming calls to this one dispatch center. And this occurred because of increased ordinances criminalizing homelessness and poverty. He defines this phenomena as complaint-oriented policing. Then we see these two reports by Jung et al. And what we have here is very high-tech software used in evaluating not only calls that are coming into a call center, but other public data that we see generated by the homeless phenomena. For example, they use here the 311, which was a non-criminal call-in dispatch, and they also used the annual point-in-time count for homeless people, which, as you probably know, is conducted once a year by municipalities. They then took this data and they compared it with street images, locations frequented by homeless people, and they used prediction modeling to calculate and project homeless tent spread or migration within the city limits. This review, the authors hoped, can aid policymakers in solving the ongoing challenge of homelessness. All right, Leibovitz and Sullivan in 2025, we see here these authors also integrated point-in-time homeless counts. They combined these counts with the number of beds provided for homeless people and the quantity of participants in treatment centers. And they compared these quantities with the city laws criminalizing homelessness and associated activities. They found no statistically significant impact of such laws on the totals of homeless people. This literature is relevant because we see an affirmation of the meaning and importance of the callers who call in, and as well we see a definition of the criminalization of poverty and homelessness. And this analysis, this kind of benchmarks, can be applied to any situation in order to analyze whether or not this criminalization is actually being perpetrated by the municipality. All right, so let's look at the data here. I separated the years, and then I put it together in one graph. And we can see here the categories I used were a compilation of the dispatch categories. There's about 15 or 20 of these dispatch categories that are assigned by the dispatcher when the call comes in after talking to the caller and collecting some information. And we can see the way that I have arranged this. It starts at the left and it moves towards the right from the most violent crimes to lesser violent crimes lesser serious crimes. And finally, it sort of segues into civil offenses. So this violent crime category, I've included homicide, rape, weapons, and also service of the warrants. So we see these are just about equal between the 2 years. Now this data, I haven't done a statistical analysis on this data, so we don't have any really significant differences to report, absent this type of statistical analysis. But we can look at the quantities of the raw data and we can get an idea what's going on. And likewise, you can take this data at this stage and you could run it through a statistical analysis. All right, the second is assault and battery. This also I compiled from various different categories of assault and battery. These are about the same between the 2 years. The narcotics category, that includes also overdoses. So the officers are dispatched not only when someone suspects or reports a narcotics crime, but also when they feel someone is experiencing an overdose. And I put these together. Property crimes, that looks like there may be a little change between the 2 years. Suspicious person or motor vehicle activities or packages. This is kind of a boilerplate category, suspicious persons. Here I lump these all together. It's when everything is kind of like non-specific. However, it justifies a dispatch of a police officer. All right, the next is antisocial behavior. This is a compilation of incidents, activities, behavior which could possibly be a crime. There may be laws against them, or they may just be nuisances and bothering people. Some of these categories that I put in here are a generic type of harassment, a low-level minor sexual offenses, things like someone having a medical incident, such as a diabetic attack, or someone exhibiting psychiatric deviant behavior. Also, things like this, things like broken windows, would fall into this category. Unfortunately, probably the perpetrators wouldn't be found in these cases because the caller is observing what has happened, in the immediate past, not necessarily seeing the windows being broken in the process. All right, disorderly conduct. This is kind of its own category in USA that we've defined. Most cities and counties have laws against this so that it is a crime. You can be arrested and prosecuted for disorderly conduct, but some don't. And it's kind of one of those borderline civil offenses, antisocial behavior / criminal behavior. Typically, this disorderly conduct is tacked on to another offense, such as graffiti. But you can be prosecuted for it. All right, animals is the next category. We see the officers here being dispatched to animal issues with homeless people. Unfortunately, because we have our own animal control, they don't operate 24 hours. That's for sure. However, the animal control officers, they have the authority to issue citations, to take animals into custody, and they have special trucks to transport them to the animal shelter. So, and we don't see an indication in the data that the law enforcement officers are referring any of these animal dispatches to animal control. We just see that as they're dispatched and they have to take care of the problem. Assist the fire department and persons. Typically, law enforcement is called to assist the fire department in an ambulance, or that is an EMT, emergency medical transportation vehicle, which in this jurisdiction is operated by the fire department. But as well, I put in this category when individual persons call into this number and they ask for help, either for themselves or they ask for help maybe for someone else. And this would be, for example, if you wanted to report a missing person, or if you wanted to report maybe just an incident, something going on, maybe harassment, something like that, or some way that you needed help, you wanted the police officer to come help you. All right, for close patrol, that is a category with its own definition here in USA. Almost every jurisdiction has this behavior, law enforcement behavior, that involves a surveillance of a specific, particular, narrowly defined geographical area, such as an address, like a block or a certain address. And this particular calls that we're seeing here for these 2 years involved law enforcement officers sent in their patrol cars to drive around. And however, we have other modalities of the law enforcement officers, such as foot patrols, bicycle patrols, and horse patrols, which conceivably could also be sent on a close patrol. Welfare check is the not a crime. You don't have to accuse someone of a crime here to actually request that an officer be dispatched. And these are things such as maybe you notice your neighbor seems to be suffering from dementia, and maybe she hasn't eaten in 3 days or something like that. So we see here these basic categories and how they're being dealt with. So let's look at the reports. Every incident, every call-in has a field to say whether or not a report was generated. Every actual call-in is given a number, and when a report is issued, that report is also given a separate number. These reports are in written form, that is digital written form, and they're also public information and you can request them. Likewise, an audio of the incoming call is likewise available in digital format and as public information. All right, so we can see for the reports, only 8% of the incoming calls resulted in a report. And that was a total of 406 reports. And here I've separated it by year. So this is the first year. All right, the second bar graph here, I've lumped together 3 different no report required disposition codes. And so this represents a set of circumstances which the officers recognize as basically not really requiring a written report. It's already kind of been standards established. In this case, it was 40% of all the calls for a total of 2,120 calls. Now, with this data, we cannot infer or deduce that 60% of the calls required a report. The information just isn't there. And likewise, for all of these, for example, for the no contact, if no contact were made, here we're seeing 26% for a total of 1,357 calls. We can't infer that 74% there was contact made. Likewise, for the next category, there was contact, but no report was required. 24.2% for a total of 1,259. Citations, we only see 3 for a total of less than 1%. Now, for arrests, we don't have any overall comprehensive information about how many arrests were made. That is, how many of these calls resulted in somebody being taken into custody. Because there isn't any really standardized code for this. They only get one disposition code for each call. Similarly to the category, they only get one category available. And so for the reports, a lot of the reports are going to be actually created as the result of a warrant service. Not all of them, but a lot of them. And so you can find out whether or not the person was taken into custody, that is, whether or not the dispatch for service of a warrant resulted in an arrest by requesting the reports and reading them and find out whether or not that were true. In other words, we can't assume that every time an officer was dispatched to serve a warrant, that warrant was successful and someone was taken into custody. All right, here's the second year. It's more or less the same. We have a few more records, a few more call-ins. For the reports, we have 11.4%, or a total of 606 call-ins and reports. For no report required, we have 35%, or a total of 1,858. For no contact, we have 27.5%, or a total of 1,461. For contact made but no report required, we have 24.1% for a total of 1,279. We have 3 codes here and a disposition code for arrest, 2 for an adult and 1 for a juvenile. And likewise, we have 3 citations, and both of these are less than 1%. All right, so now I've matched up these reports that we just looked at with the dispatch code that originated them. And I've separated it by the years according to the color here. And so we can see that the general quantities here, just to let you know what the public has to deal with, what the officers have to deal with. For example, in the violent crimes category, we have, over these 2 years, we had 70 calls regarding homeless people with these categories, these violent crime categories. And for our close patrol, we have here only 1 report that was generated as a result of a close patrol. And then we have our welfare checks here. You can compare. There was a few less the second year than the first. And then these are the percentages of that report data, just to kind of give you some kind of example of how it compares to the overall, that is the total amount of calls. Most of these are pushing 1% or under 1%. We have 2 that are higher. Property destruction, 3.04% and 2.22%. Disorderly contact, 1.54% for the first year and 0.11% for the second year. Antisocial behavior, the second year went up at 1.47% compared to the first year of 0.46%. And then for the violent crimes, we can also see they sort of plateaued at 0.6 and 0.73%. With assault and battery pushing 1% at 0.96 and 0.79. Narcotics, it looks like that went down a bit. So that kind of gives you some kind of idea about the relative amount. For conclusions, I can say the system is inefficient in dispatching law enforcement to social welfare and animal welfare calls. Also, the public perceives homeless people as being involved with violent crimes as well as petty offenses. We can see that the call data contains some empirical data, such as warrants and reports of warrant service. For future research, we can say that a statistical analysis can be applied to the data that we've collected so far based on the variables such as time, location, address, dispatch, and disposition codes. In addition, advanced software can be obtained by Santa Fe RECC, and if it is obtained, for example, if they start recording the GIS plots with every single call, then advanced software can be applied and can correlate calls with economic indicator data and geospatial points. I hope you enjoyed this presentation, and I hope you can use it in your research and your studies and your jurisdiction.